When the last thread of patience snapped inside Hope, the bright lights of Forrester Creations no longer felt like home, but a gilded cage. Hope for the future had been her soul, a labor of conviction born out of empathy, integrity, and the belief that fashion could mean more than vanity. But now, it was little more than an echo of compromise. The board meetings had become interrogations, and her creative vision, once celebrated, was now being micromanaged, dissected, and finally strangled. The restructuring under Steffi's authority was the final blow. Contracts were rewritten, budgets slashed, and for the first time, Hope realized that the dream she had nurtured beneath the Forrester name had been quietly taken from her. She could either surrender or start over. And starting over meant war. Leaving Forrester was not just a resignation, it was an act of rebellion. The name Forrester carried weight, history, and generations of polished perfection. Hope's exit sent shockwaves through the industry, dividing opinions. Some saw courage, others saw betrayal. But for Hope, the moment she walked out of those glass doors, she felt something she hadn't in years: clarity. Yet freedom came with its own cruelty. Within days, she realized that every connection she had, every sponsor, every resource, every runway slot, had been quietly aligned to Forrester's empire. Fashion Week refused her proposals. Investors hesitated, murmuring about risk and reputation. Even the media outlets that once glorified her as the compassionate face of modern design turned cautious, unwilling to defy Ridge's influence. In the silence of her small, rented studio, Hope faced the unfiltered truth. Independence required more than vision. It demanded allies. That's when Deke appeared, an unexpected ghost from the past, part sinner, part savior. He knew what it meant to be dismissed, to claw back respect when the world thought you'd failed. With him was Remy, an artist from the underbelly of the scene, reckless but magnetic, whose designs carried the pulse of rebellion. Together, they offered not just partnership but revolution. Their proposal was audacious: create a house that rejected the sterile perfection of legacy fashion. No ivory towers, no generational politics, no moral posturing. Just raw, unapologetic creativity. It was everything Hope had never dared to attempt under the Forrester banner. And yet, for all its chaos, it felt like truth. As word spread, whispers became headlines. Hope Logan leaves Forrester. New label promises to redefine fashion ethics. Some saw it as naive idealism, others as a declaration of war. But the real shock came when a younger generation stepped forward to follow her. RJ, disillusioned by the constant tug-of-war between his parents' ideals, expressed curiosity about joining. And Electra, ambitious and fiercely intelligent, saw in Hope's rebellion a chance to rewrite her own story outside the shadow of her family's reputation. Their presence transformed the venture into something symbolic, a movement rather than a business. Forrester Creations reacted like an organism sensing infection. Ridge viewed the new label as treason. To him, Hope had not just left. She had turned her back on family, loyalty, and everything he had built. Steffi, always the strategist, began countering immediately. She ensured Forrester's next collection mirrored Hope's new aesthetic, soft rebellion sanitized by corporate polish. The message was clear. Whatever Hope could do, Forrester could do better, and with far more stability. It was a direct hit. But what neither Ridge nor Steffi could control was perception. Hope's authenticity began resonating with the public in ways that surprised even her. Social media buzzed not with polished campaigns, but with behind-the-scenes clips of Hope's team working in cramped spaces, of Deke sketching designs on old fabric rolls, of Electra modeling unfinished prototypes under raw lighting. The imperfection became the allure. It was fashion stripped of facade, intimate, flawed, real. Meanwhile, Brooke found herself standing on the fault line of two worlds. She had spent decades balancing between passion and diplomacy, between Ridge's dominance and her children's independence. But this time, the choice cut deeper than any before. Ridge expected her support. Forrester was, after all, their shared legacy. Yet Brooke's heart ached with pride and fear watching her daughter build something alone. Every headline about Hope's reckless departure felt like a dagger. Every boardroom whisper about her emotional instability made Brooke want to scream. She wanted to protect her daughter, but she also knew that open defiance of Ridge would cost her the fragile peace they had finally rebuilt. Their marriage had survived countless storms, but this one was different. It wasn't about infidelity or scandal, it was about belief. As the new label, tentatively named Reverie, began to take shape, the fashion world turned its gaze. Critics expected it to fail within weeks, dismissing it as a vanity project. But under Deke and Remy's creative chaos, something extraordinary began to form. The designs weren't polished, they were alive. Denim collided with silk, structure with disorder. Hope's guiding principle, style with soul, became the brand's identity. Each collection told a story of contradictions, of rebellion fused with empathy. The first small show, held in an abandoned warehouse rather than a runway, drew unexpected attention. Influencers, disillusioned by corporate perfection, called it a breath of raw air. And when RJ posted a photo of the line with the caption, "The future isn't inherited, it's created," the movement went viral. Inside Forrester, the reaction was swift and brutal. Ridge convened emergency meetings, furious at what he called the exploitation of family names. Steffi accused Hope of manipulating public sympathy. The more Hope succeeded, the deeper the divide became. Brooke was torn apart, watching Ridge's anger simmer into resentment. The man who once admired Hope's spirit now spoke of her as if she were an enemy. Their dinners grew colder, their conversations shorter. Ridge couldn't understand Brooke's hesitation to condemn her daughter, while Brooke couldn't comprehend his inability to forgive. What he saw as betrayal, she saw as evolution. To Ridge, family loyalty was sacred. To Brooke, individuality was survival. Behind the glamour, Hope faced her own demons. The freedom she fought for came with sleepless nights, financial strain, and moments of crushing doubt. Every delayed shipment, every critical review, every whispered rumor of bankruptcy felt like another ghost of Forrester trying to haunt her. Yet, it was in those moments that her conviction burned brightest. She wasn't building a company. She was building meaning. For years she had been told that compassion didn't sell, that optimism was naive. Now she was determined to prove that authenticity could move markets. But Ridge wasn't finished. Quietly, he began using his connections to block her progress, pressuring investors, buying out vendors, even influencing permits for her shows. He told himself it was protection, that he was saving her from humiliation, but deep down it was pride, wounded and roaring. Steffi, though outwardly strategic, carried her own unease. She admired Hope's courage even as she resented it. In her most private thoughts, she envied her half-sister's purity of purpose, the freedom to choose ideals over legacy. Yet she also feared what it represented, a future where the Forrester name no longer commanded reverence. Brooke, trapped between two fires, began to fracture. Her mornings were filled with calls from Ridge demanding loyalty, her evenings with tearful visits from Hope seeking understanding. Every word she spoke felt like betrayal to someone. She tried to mediate, to reason, to remind them that family should transcend business, but her voice was drowned out by ambition. Even her reflection began to betray her. She saw in her own eyes the exhaustion of decades spent holding fragile peace between love and chaos. The breaking point came during Fashion Week, when Forrester's polished new collection shared the same theme as Reverie's underground showcase, redefining the future. Critics immediately drew comparisons, some even accusing Forrester of stealing Hope's concept. The press frenzy turned vicious. In a single night, two dynasties stood on opposite ends of the same dream. Hope's show was raw, unrefined, emotionally charged. Models walked barefoot on concrete, the soundtrack filled with echoes of factory noise and whispered voices of seamstresses. Every piece carried a message about sustainability, authenticity, and rebellion against privilege. The audience, expecting amateur chaos, found themselves transfixed. By the end, The applause was thunderous. Across town, Ridge watched the broadcast replay in silence, his face unreadable. Brooke stood beside him, sensing the distance growing like a canyon. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but lethal. "She used our name to rise against us." Brooke's reply was quiet but devastating. "No, Ridge. She used herself." It was then he realized that Brooke wasn't just defending her daughter, she believed in her. And for Ridge, that was the deepest betrayal of all. The fallout was inevitable. Arguments turned to silence. Trust turned to resentment. Their marriage, which had survived scandal after scandal, now trembled under the weight of ideology. Ridge couldn't forgive what he saw as defiance. Brooke couldn't love a man who mistook control for protection. Hope's success had not only created a rival brand, but exposed every crack in the family's foundation. Meanwhile, Revery's rise continued. It wasn't flawless. There were financial struggles, production errors, even public backlash from conservative critics, but it had soul. For every setback, there was resilience. Hope's partnership with Deke and Remy evolved into a dynamic of mutual respect, and the presence of RJ and Electra gave the brand generational energy. Together, they represented something Forrester could no longer claim: relevance. As the months passed, the tension between Brooke and Ridge became unbearable. Their home, once filled with laughter and memories, now felt like a museum of former love. The air was thick with unspoken words. Ridge's pride, Brooke's compassion, Hope's independence, all collided into a perfect storm that no one could stop. Brooke often found herself staring at old photographs, wondering if love could truly survive the collision of ambition and ideals. Ridge, meanwhile, threw himself into work, trying to design away the ache of losing both his muse and his wife's faith. The question lingered like a ghost over them all. Would this be the end of Brooke and Ridge? Perhaps this time, love wasn't enough. Perhaps the era of compromise was over. In the mirror of Hope's rebellion, both of them were forced to see what they had become, a couple bound by history but divided by vision. And somewhere, under the dim lights of her small studio, Hope smiled faintly as she watched the first orders roll in for Revery's debut line. She knew the cost of what she'd done, the fractures she'd caused, the pain she'd unleashed. But she also knew that for the first time, she was truly herself. She wasn't a Forrester creation anymore. She was Hope, unbound, imperfect, and free. And in that truth, both beauty and tragedy found their home. The night Ridge raised his hand against Brooke would forever mark the point of no return. It wasn't just a slap. It was a fracture that echoed through decades of love, betrayal, reconciliation, and shared dreams. In that split second, every word they had spoken in anger turned into something far more dangerous, final. Brooke didn't cry out, didn't move, didn't even look away. Her silence became the mirror Ridge didn't want to face. The weight of what he had done settled in the air like smoke that refused to clear. For the first time in his life, Ridge Forrester, the man who built empires out of elegance, saw himself stripped of control, revealed not as a designer or a patriarch, but as a man consumed by fear of losing everything he could no longer own. Brooke stood in the aftermath like a statue, her cheeks stinging, her heart shattering in slow motion. All her life, she had believed in redemption. She had forgiven Ridge's arrogance, his betrayals, his endless tug-of-war between loyalty and desire. But this was different. Violence, even once, carried a truth words could not erase. She stared at him, not with hatred, but with the unbearable recognition of what they had become. The Ridge who had once traced her face with trembling fingers was gone. What stood before her was a man undone by pride and insecurity, trapped in the illusion of control. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but unyielding. "You've crossed the line, Ridge, and there's no going back." Ridge wanted to apologize, but the words turned to ash before leaving his mouth. Shame burned through him, but so did defiance. In his mind, the slap had not come from cruelty, but from the unbearable pressure of watching his world unravel. Hope's betrayal, Brooke's divided loyalty, the humiliation of seeing his family name challenged, all of it had chipped away at the composure he had spent a lifetime perfecting. Yet in trying to assert dominance, he had destroyed the last vestige of respect that held his marriage together. He watched Brooke walk away, her movements slow and deliberate, the quiet dignity of a woman who had decided to stop saving a man who refused to be saved. The scandal exploded within hours. Brooke didn't speak to the press, but silence in Los Angeles was never protection. It was provocation. Whispers leaked from Forrester's inner circle, and soon the story became public. Domestic turmoil at Forrester Creations read one headline, followed by speculation about the collapse of their marriage. Ridge tried to bury himself in work, denying everything, but the truth was written in the eyes of those around him. Steffi, horrified, confronted him privately, torn between her loyalty to her father and her empathy for Brooke. She had always seen her parents as flawed but unbreakable. Now she saw the cracks as gaping wounds. "You didn't just hit her, Dad," she whispered. "You hit everything we believed we were better than." Brooke found temporary refuge at Hope's studio. It was ironic. She, the woman who once built her life around Forrester's legacy, was now hiding in the very space that symbolized defiance against it. Hope's reaction was complex. Fury for her mother, sorrow for Ridge, and guilt for the chain of events that had set everything in motion. Brooke assured her this wasn't Hope's fault, but the truth was harder to suppress. Every choice, every argument, every line drawn in the sand between old loyalty and new freedom had led to this breaking point. "Sometimes love dies quietly," Brooke told her, "and sometimes it ends in a storm. Either way, it never looks the same afterward." Meanwhile, Ridge spiraled. For a man accustomed to control, chaos became unbearable. His attempts to reach Brooke were met with silence. Calls unanswered, letters returned. Even Steffi's interventions failed. He stood in the home they had shared, surrounded by memories now turned to ghosts, the scent of her perfume on the curtains, the sketches she once praised, the echo of laughter from nights when the world felt simple. But remorse, he learned, was not redemption. It was purgatory. The slap had not just ended a marriage, it had dismantled his identity. Forrester Creations began to feel hollow, each design meeting haunted by the question no one dared ask aloud: could a man who lost control in his personal life still represent grace in art? Brooke, on the other hand, began rediscovering the strength that had always defined her beneath the veneer of romance. The bruise faded, but the clarity remained. She filed for separation quietly, refusing to turn her pain into spectacle. The tabloids wanted scandal, but Brooke gave them silence. She refused to let the world feed on her dignity. Her energy shifted toward Hope's growing brand, Reverie, which was beginning to flourish beyond expectations. Every stitch, every collection became a form of therapy, a reclamation of self. Working beside her daughter, she found purpose again, not as Ridge's muse, not as Forrester's figurehead, but as a woman who had finally chosen herself. The confrontation between Ridge and Deke came next, raw and inevitable. Deke, protective of Brooke and grateful for Hope's trust, confronted Ridge at Forrester headquarters. Words escalated, tempers flared, and for a moment it seemed history would repeat itself. But this time Ridge didn't raise his hand. He walked away, realizing that every act of aggression only carved his isolation deeper. Alone in his office, he looked at the Forrester name engraved on the door and wondered when it had stopped being a legacy and started feeling like a prison. Brooke's absence began to transform Forrester in ways Ridge hadn't anticipated. Without her warmth, the brand lost something intangible. The campaigns were immaculate, but lifeless. The staff moved efficiently, but without joy. Investors noticed. Steffi tried to stabilize the company's image, but even she couldn't deny the emotional vacuum left behind. When a photo of Brooke at a Reverie event went viral, standing beside Hope, smiling with quiet confidence, Ridge felt both admiration and devastation. She looked radiant, free, untouched by the weight of his name. That image, more than the slap, became the true end of their story. Yet beneath the ashes, a strange transformation began. Ridge, stripped of illusions, faced the hardest truth of all. He had loved Brooke not for who she was, but for how she made him feel about himself. She had been his mirror, reflecting the best parts of him when he believed in his own myth. Now, without her, he was forced to confront the man beneath the legend. Therapy sessions replaced board meetings. He attended them not out of obligation, but desperation. Slowly, he began to see his anger for what it was, a mask for fear. Fear of obsolescence, of losing his place in a world evolving faster than he could control. Brooke, meanwhile, began to heal through creation. Revery's success wasn't measured in numbers, but in emotion. The brand's authenticity struck a chord with a new generation of women who saw strength in vulnerability. Critics praised Hope's leadership, but everyone knew Brooke's influence pulsed quietly behind it. Her calm presence grounded the chaos, her experience turning mistakes into lessons. When she finally appeared on a televised interview months later, speaking about the power of reinvention, her words resonated deeply. Sometimes you have to lose the person you love to find the person you are meant to be. For Ridge, watching that interview was both torture and revelation. He realized then that Brooke didn't need him anymore, and maybe she never had. What they shared had been real, but it had also been built on dependency, on the illusion that love could fix the cracks that self-doubt created. Now, she stood on her own, and he had to decide whether he could do the same. Steffi and Hope, though divided by history, found a fragile truce in the wake of their parents' collapse. Both understood that the feud had cost too much, that the war between family and individuality had left scars deeper than any corporate rivalry. Steffi even reached out to Hope privately, acknowledging that despite their differences, Brooke's resilience had reminded her of Taylor's strength. It was a quiet, unexpected moment of empathy, a flicker of humanity amid the wreckage. As months turned into a year, the distance between Ridge and Brooke solidified into permanence. There were no dramatic reunions, no last-minute reconciliations. They saw each other at public events, brief nods, polite words, nothing more. But in those glances, there was still something unspoken. Not love, perhaps, but respect born of survival. They had both endured the fire and emerged changed. Ridge continued his work, humbler, quieter, his designs now carrying a depth that only pain could teach. Brooke, ever luminous, became a mentor figure for young designers at Reverie, guiding them to balance ambition with integrity. Their story no longer needed an ending, it had already transformed into legacy. The slap, once a moment of unforgivable violence, became a symbol of what unchecked pride could destroy. For Brooke, it was the line that freed her. For Ridge, it was the scar that taught him humility. In the end, they both found redemption, but on separate paths. The fashion world moved on, yet their names remained intertwined, two forces forever linked by love's most painful lesson, that creation and destruction often walk hand in hand. And on quiet nights, when the city lights shimmered against the glass walls of Forrester Creations, Ridge would sometimes sketch without purpose, the curve of a woman's face appearing almost involuntarily. He would stop, stare, and whisper her name into the silence, not out of longing, but gratitude. Because Brooke had been both his muse and his mirror, the storm and the calm, and though their story had ended, it had given him the most essential design of all, the blueprint for forgiveness.